Good morning, folks. We are live in the business growth community with my super special guest this morning, Adam Birkett of Northern Powerhouse Media.
Good morning.
I'm talking all things podcasts. So I am particularly interested in this conversation today because I have to confess, launching a podcast was my big thing for this year. When I was setting the goals for the year, the TEDx talk was last year's big thing. Launching a podcast was this year's big thing. It's fair to say the year hasn't entirely gone as expected.
So yeah.
But it does mean that it's still a big thing on my agenda. So I'm really interested to pick your brains today, Adam. Just tell us a little bit about you, about your background, your business, and kind of how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, sure. I've been running three businesses really, and one main one for about 13 years. I've been in the event sector for a long time. Obviously, thanks to our friend COVID-19, the event sector has been decimated this year, which has actually been a blessing and a silver lining in a number of ways, because it's allowed us to really concentrate on some of the things we've been doing in the background for a couple of years, and actually really focus on them, one of which is our suite of media services, and podcasting is one of those. So it's been a really fun year from that perspective.
Yes.
To be able to sort of focus on those things that those things that always sort of get us pushed off to one side.
It's giving you some breathing space, whether you liked it or not.
Yeah, some good perspective and some breathing space, and we've all really enjoyed the challenge of really concentrating and growing that side of the business. And I think podcasting, as I'm sure we'll discuss the next half an hour or so, it's such a growth industry, and it's actually quite an exciting media to be involved with. So we've all really enjoyed that challenge and getting to know it in its ins and outs a little bit more.
Yes, yeah, I can totally get that. So why should people consider creating their own podcast?
Good question. Well, I think fundamentally, I think podcasts are a great way of anybody with a message of any sort getting that message out there. Whether it be in business and you've got something to sell, or whether you've got something to say in any respect, podcasts are a great way of doing it. The reason for that is it's massive growth industry. Year on year in the UK, about 25% growth. And I think, according to Ofcom, I think 7.1 million people are listening to podcasts on a periodic basis, which is about 1 in 8 people in the UK. So there's a massive market out there.
Yeah.
People are able to be very, very specific about their messages, not like listening to radio shows or watching YouTube channels and stuff. You can be far more specific about what you've got to say, which means people can be far more specific about what they're searching for as well. It's also quite a cost-effective way of marketing. So from a business perspective, actually setting up and publishing and distributing your podcast is quite cost effective. It doesn't cost a lot of money.
Intriguing. I'm hoping we're going to pique a few people's interest today, and by the end of this session, maybe send a few people away all excited about their own podcasts.
I hope so. Yeah.
So let's cover some really super basic stuff. Things like, how often should you publish a podcast, and how long should it be? Are there golden rules about any of that, or are you just winging it?
Yeah, I mean, there is some basic stuff to follow with regards to that. And I think actually the key is to be consistent. And it doesn't really necessarily matter whether you publish on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, a monthly basis. I think the key is being consistent. And that way, once you've established an audience, they know when they can expect the next episode. It's kind of like the same if you're broadcasting on television. People know that the 6 o'clock news is at 6 o'clock every day. It's the same kind of thing. You know when you
get over at that point.
So it's about knowing when your next episode is going to land, so that people can look forward to it. So that in terms of consistency of delivery, I think that's key. In terms of the length of your podcast, I think anything really between about 15 minutes and 60 or 75 minutes is your golden sort of hour. And the reason for that is how long people can concentrate and stay on subject for. I think the thing about podcasts is it can be quite intense in terms of subject matter. It is people talking for the majority. So unless you break it up with musical interlude or whatever it might be to keep it fresh, an hour is a long time to listen to people talk anything. So for me, I would always try and stick to less than 60 minutes.
Judy's with us as well, and Martin. We've got some great listeners today. So I suppose we should think about things like tech, because I guess that's probably a lot of people's questions. Like, I'd love the idea of creating one, loads of things to say, But yeah, how much tech do I need? Can I just do it on my phone? Can I do it?
I think with a lot of these things,
studio?
People do get quite scared by the tech side of things. I think actually that should be quite far down your list of concerns.
Oh, interesting.
In my opinion, I think the first thing you need to worry about is your presenting technique, or you're speaking to someone, talking about your subject. Be a good presenter, work on those things. In terms of capturing your audio and then distributing your audio, you can start off pretty basic. You can get quite pro with it. To be honest with you, to start off with, in terms of actually making your podcast, mixing it, editing it, distributing it, all the rest of it, you could do that from a tablet. You can do it from a laptop.
You might be doing that business.
You can record your audio on a phone, for example. That's not the worst audio in the world.
Yeah.
However, even the most tech-savvy people making producers will struggle to create something with that tech that will compete with the really high-end stuff.
Yeah.
So unless you're creating exceptionally outstanding content, subconsciously listeners expect a certain quality of production. So if it's not up to scratch, then they might just think it's a rubbish podcast. And actually, the content might be really good. So that's when you need to start looking at what kit you need. And you could go really deep. The basic stuff is you need a really good microphone, or a decent microphone. You can now get microphones that you plug directly into your laptop or your PC, which does all the interface stuff for you and talks to your computer and just makes it sound so much better. That would be your first port of call. And then you can get really, you can be advanced in the other piece of kit that you need in terms of editing software and all that kind of stuff to actually create it. But to start with,
that's when I glaze over.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's really important that people don't see the tech as a barrier.
That's a great point.
The entry point for podcasts is pretty low. As long as you've got something to say and you're capable of saying it pretty well, on a consistent episodic basis, then don't worry so much about the tech. There's ways around it. You can either budget yourself until you get better at it, or you use a company like us to hire production or anything in between.
So the editing bit, because I guess that's probably one of my key questions as well, because as most people will have noticed, none of my videos get edited, and my my excuse for that is that you get the very natural me. It's mostly because I can't be asked to do any editing. So how important is it, do you think, to do that whole editing and perfecting and what have you with a podcast? Because obviously podcast, I think, is because you're just getting the sound and you're not getting the visual, whereas I think when you get the visual, you've got a more natural connection. So I always kind of think that on just audio, the sound quality and maybe the ums and the and stuff is even more important.
Yeah, I think you're right in terms of these things kind of get highlighted a little bit more when it comes to audio than video. But actually, there's an element of it being organic and natural which you should stick with. I think people get hung up with the idea of it being perfect, and actually, perfection's unachievable anyway. So let's be. I think the key is be yourself when you're presenting, but inevitably, particularly at the beginning, it's like anything. The more you do it, the better you're going to get at doing it. So at the beginning, there will inevitably be times where you're suddenly blank and you've got nothing to say, or you're just going, where was I? I've lost my thread, or whatever it is. And that's where editing is useful. At the end of the day, you've got to keep people captured to what you're saying, so they want to continue listening. So in terms of editing, you can do it with some fairly basic software like Audacity or GarageBand. They're really cheap, easily accessible, and easy to use pieces of software that anyone can get. And that is just simply a case of listening through your audio, waiting to the bit that you want, and putting the scissors there and putting the scissors there and getting rid of that bit and fading it. And that's a fairly simple process, but it can be time consuming. And that's why a lot of our clients come to us and the first thing they say is, can you edit our podcast? Actually have this audio ready to go. They have the audio ready to go, but they sort of like need to just make it all concise and, to the point.
It kind of reminds me of when I first left the franchise that I used to be with and set up on my own. I'm just going to close my emails because I can hear them bonging away in the background. When I first set up on my own, I had a little dabble at creating my own website, because a lot of clients used to say to me, do you think I should try and do it myself? Or do I absolutely need to, if they're really tight on budget? And I would always say to them, if you can do it yourself to a reasonable standard and within a reasonable timescale, then have a go at it. But if not, hire somebody. So I just thought, well, I'll have a little dabble. I've got time on my hands at the moment, so I'll have a little dabble to actually see how easy this was. And I had the most brilliant day. I loved this whole day of faffing about with WordPress. I spent about 3 hours at one point trying to change a footer. Thought totally loved it. But by the end of the day, it was like, yeah, this thing's not happening in 300 years.
Yeah. It's one of those things where you might spend a lifetime learning the skill, or certainly a lot of time. And it might not be the best use of your time. If you're a business owner, or you've got 100 things to do every day, learning how to produce a podcast might not be one of the things you want to spend all of your time doing.
Do you think is it almost okay to start off at a reasonable level and then improve and increase things as you go? So could you start off with basic sound equipment and just working it out yourself, and then gradually upgrade as you go?
I definitely think that's a good idea. I think the key is you've got to have a really good concept for your podcast.
Ooh, okay.
I think that's the starting point. Like, what do you want to say? What is your message? We have a number of clients that just create internal podcasts for their company. So rather than doing newsletters, they create podcasts that everyone in the company listens to. We've got pharmaceutical companies and solicitors and they just have messages and regular contact with their big company. And it's a good way of reaching out. So that's their concept. Then we've got wellness clients who do a wellness activity, and they've got podcasts for their clients. A number of different things. It just depends what your specific content is. Once you've got your content, you can then dabble with the idea. And you're absolutely right. The entry level, because it's low, you can use basic equipment and start trying it and see if you like it and see if it works. As soon as you get a listener base and regular subscribers and those sort of things, you go, right, okay, I've got something here. The majority of our clients come to us at the point where they've already started. And they're going, oh my God, this is just mad. I'm spending all my life editing. It doesn't sound very good. And I've had a couple of my listeners say, it's not great. How can we improve it? Blah, blah. That's where we would come in and take over the production side of things and just take it to the next level, really.
Yeah. So you can make a start. You can do a little dabbling and then start to perfect as you go. Because I think that's always one of the big challenges. That I know that's one of the questions I've always got is, do I have to be perfect before I get started? Do I need to have a big bank of episodes before I get started?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that a number of people have said to us, actually, is like, do I need to be brilliant at this right from the off? It's just like anything. Dip your toe in the water and see if you enjoy it, and see if it's worthwhile marketing activity or worthwhile for you in terms of your own progression in your career, or whatever it might be, whatever your concept is and whatever your target is. Do that first and then worry about getting better. No one's going to be perfect at doing anything straight out of the box. So it's unreasonable to expect that of yourself. And it's also unreasonable to, create loads of content. Inevitably, if you were to produce 10 podcast episodes right from the beginning, and get to the end of those 10 before you actually release any of them, you will inevitably look back on episode 1 and go, that is rubbish. So I'm going to have to start again. You spend huge amounts of time doing it. I think actually the key is don't get too hung up on it. I think the key thing is the content. That is the content. If you've got I keep saying the message, but that is the key to it. Because if that message resonates with anybody, then somebody's going to listen to it. And if someone listens to it, then you'll start getting feedback and you'll start getting ratings and you'll start getting subscriptions and all that kind of stuff. At that point, you can start to develop it. And the other thing is how do you sort of stand out in the crowd? Because podcasts is such a growth industry and everyone's making podcasts. So how do you make yours rank higher on searches when you go to Apple Podcasts or whatever it is? And I think a really good name, so think about all the, if you're a podcast listener, think about the names of the podcasts that you listen to. Something that grabs your attention or something that's relevant to your field is obviously pretty important.
We need to be scintillating and hilarious.
Yeah, funny or whatever. A decent thumbnail that is relevant to your style or whatever. And then a good description. So when people do click on it, they go, yeah, I can't fancy this to that. And they hit play or download.
Yeah.
Those things are important. You get in there to the point where you understand whether A, you like doing it, B, there's a listener base for what you have to offer. And as you get to that point, then you're right. Now we're in business. Now we're cooking.
Properly.
Yeah, now what's my strategy to make this good?
So how easy is it to actually get your podcast out there? Because you've mentioned a couple of different places that you can put it, but there's loads of different options for that these days. So is that...
There's loads of places to host your podcast. There's absolutely loads of options. In terms of how to do it, it's pretty straightforward. You set up an account, you upload it, and you pay a subscription. Most of them these days have got 1 or 2 months free or a freebie giveaway to start off with. And then, like I say, because an entry into podcasts is pretty cheap, so hosting is usually at 10 or 20 quid a month for your podcast. So it's not a massive cost, particularly if you consider right from the off, you're doing all the actual audio side of things and the production side just from your existing kit, whether you've got a phone or a laptop or whatever it is. Pretty much your only cost if you want to just dip your toe into the podcast world. Obviously, it's pretty basic at that level, but there's options to move on.
Yeah, it's interesting as well that you talked about a really good thumbnail, because I'm a member of a group that often sort of supports people to launch podcasts, and I'm always fascinated by so many people in there are dabbling with their own thumbnail through stuff like Canva, and they come in and kind of go, "What does everybody think of this?" And I almost always go, "I think it's rubbish." I think it's amazing. So if I was doing this, and Dave is watching this morning, so Dave Bradford does all my graphics. I was
just going to say that, yeah.
So I would always go to Dave and kind of go, do me something that looks at least vaguely decent. Do you think something like that matters?
I do, because when you do your search, as a listener to podcasts, you do your search on your Apple Podcast or whatever it might be. You search for whatever category, you're going to get a list of podcasts that meet that genre and that criteria. And people like shiny things, don't they? We're all magpies, really. So if you've got a bright yellow or shiny thing, that's going to capture your eye a little bit more. But yeah, you're right. It's like if you really want to go for it properly right from the off, using a graphic designer to create a really good thumbnail. And also, it's not just the thumbnail. The thumbnail is the first thing that will get you to click on it. But then you've got to read the description, and you've got to have a really punchy little bio or a little description of the podcast to make people want to go, yeah, this sounds exactly what I'm looking for.
Yeah, because I think those little bits like that people often underestimate, because you're right. If you're in that space of thinking, I fancy listening to a new podcast, and you're going to do a search and bring up a list. For me, I'm definitely looking at, if I think that thumbnail looks a little bit cheap, then I think, well, the whole thing's probably going to be a bit cheap, and I don't imagine there's going to be great content in there. I view the reflection of budget basically on that.
Yeah, as I said earlier, the actual content of the podcast might be exceptional.
Yeah.
The stuff around it, the production side of things, the way that the thumbnail looks, the description, if it's all being about half-assed and not really thought about, then, you're not going to think that's an exceptionally well thought out piece of content. So you're probably not going to waste your time on it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So thinking about kind of content or format, because I guess your classic stuff is either it's you chatting, or you do interview style like this. Do you have any thoughts in terms of which one connects better with people? Are there bigger technical challenges if you're doing interview stuff?
Yeah, it's a good question. A lot of it's personal preference. I personally like listening to people in conversation. I find that being a fly on the wall in a conversation that you might not ordinarily be privy to, I think is really interesting. And it's not the same as listening to a radio show where they're under time constraints and they've got much more regulation, all that kind of stuff. So I quite like that. I do listen to a lot of solo podcasts as well. They tend to be a lot shorter.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
Again, like I said earlier, like if you're chatting away on your own to yourself for an hour, they might call in some professionals to take you away. Because, you can be wobbling on about a lot of things, and it's not that interesting. Whereas when you play off somebody else and the conversation naturally develops, or it naturally goes in this way or then the other way, I think that's generally a little bit more engaging. In terms of the content, that you're absolutely right. That's where it gets a bit more tricky from a production perspective. If you're on your own, you just plug a mic into the side of your laptop and off you go. As soon as you've got two people, you've got two inputs.
Yes.
And therefore it gets a bit tricky. So one of the major challenges over this summer, this year particularly, is that people aren't able to host podcasts live. So they can't have two people in a room talking to each other. So all of this audio is being captured generally over Zoom or some other conferencing software. And by doing that, the quality of the audio is shocking straight off the bat. So it creates a massive challenge. And we've consulted with a number of our clients when the lockdown hit back in March. This is exactly where we started to work consultatively with a number of clients in terms of just getting the production values up. So what you get to a point where, yes, you are having the conversation over Zoom.
Yes.
It's fine. But if you record the audio from Zoom, it's like, this doesn't matter how much technical wizardry you apply to it. It's just like, you're just not going to get it sounding great. So instead, you need a secondary device to record audio in both locations. So for example, if we were having the Zoom conversation now,
yeah,
get your phone out, hit record on the phone and record your audio locally. Your interviewee also does the same.
Right.
You then send the audio to your producer, or if you're producing it yourself, and then you download those two pieces of audio into one piece of software. So that automatic, and that's just using a phone. The phone's going to create a lot better audio than Zoom is going to, because when you're transmitting audio across the internet, it compresses it. There's lots of interruptions, the quality, dropouts and all that kind of stuff. You want to eliminate all that and get to a good basic level.
Yes, got it.
And that's just as a starting level. The next stage would be quite often when we've been doing important podcasts or one-off or specials or high profile ones, we would send hardware in the post to our interviewee.
Okay, yeah.
So we deliver microphones and audio interfaces and piece of software, and then we go online and teach them how to use it. We plug it all in, and then we've got really exceptionally good quality audio for us to work with.
Yeah, we get it. That makes sense.
So there's challenges there.
I'd be intrigued to know from the people who are listening to us today, their thoughts on the kind of solo podcast versus the interview conversational style. I'd be really intrigued to know if people have got a particular preference for what they listen to at the moment.
And what sort of podcasts as well? What sort of genres are people interested in?
Yeah, see, I'm definitely a sort of businessy podcast person. I tend to go through fits and starts because I'll not listen to anything for ages, and then I'll totally burn through a load and think, God, why haven't we listened to podcasts? These are ace.
Yeah. And you end up with like a backlog if you subscribe, and you've got 87 episodes to listen to.
Yeah.
I always stick them on in the car, and if I'm out running, and that's when I listen to my podcasts. And it's just this. I find it really great for escaping. Actually, just getting out of your own head and listening to somebody else's world for a little while is really nice.
Yeah. I find when you're sort of half occupied, like you say, when you're running or walking, doing something else, doing your housework, God help us all, something like that, where you're actually doing something, where you're doing an activity, but it's not necessarily something that's totally mind-blowing, so your mind is free. I find it works well.
I love those moments where it's kind of on in the background and you're doing something else, and you find yourself completely suddenly realizing you're invested, and you've stopped doing whatever it is you're doing, and you find yourself just sat down, immersed in the audio. For me, I listen to a lot of, I like listening to people's stories and life stories and all that kind of stuff. So anyone who's been interviewed that I find interesting, listen to their stories. And that for me,
the whole thing, isn't it, about stories sell, and I think we really connect to them. And I think I definitely am I would choose, given the option, I would choose the interview style over the one-person style. Just because of that, because I think you enjoy the interaction and the sharing of opinions, and I think sometimes it's the basic thing that listening to the variety of voices is slightly more interesting than listening to just one voice. So
that would be my opinion, and the majority of our clients do more interview style. More interview, at least two participants. We've got one client. He runs a movement, I suppose, called Dad AF, and it's almost like a self-help group for dads, new dads.
Right up Dave Street.
It's really cool. There's an app for it, and we're producing a podcast. But they often have 8 contributors, and it's really rough and ready, and that's how they want it. There's loads of swearing, and it's just off the cuff. And you'll have 8 contributors all chatting with into their phones whilst they're doing the school run in the car, and it's really, really rough. But it's that's actually their MO. That's how that's their thing. It's we don't want to sound polished. We don't want to sound really produced. We want it to sound real, because we're talking to real people about a lot of really personal experiences, a lot of mental health stuff and all this kind of stuff. So it's really relevant that they don't put this polished veneer on it. It has to sound legit. It's really good.
It sounds like for our listeners, football is actually the most important podcast topic.
I'm not sure about this Anfield rap business. I
told Jake about this before, honestly. But yeah, Dave says the main one he listens to is about football and useful walking the dog. Martin's a savvier person. Martin says he enjoys the Book of Mancod podcast. Jason Fox has some awesome guests, so that one sounds really interesting.
That sounds worth checking out, yeah.
Minimalists as well, so yeah, intriguing. So we've definitely got some podcast listeners here. So from your perspective, Adam, what do you think is the difference between a sort of okay average podcast and one that's actually really going to grab people?
Fundamentally, it's the content that sings. Two elements, really. Firstly, the content. It needs to be something engaging that speaks to you as a listener. That's the most important thing. So it doesn't matter what your message is. It might be one that you're trying to sell something and you're talking around that subject. If you're in business, you're talking about a speciality or a service. Or it might be something for fun. It might be quite cathartic. Like the dad stuff I was talking about, good for mental health, and it reaches out to certain point. So fundamentally, it's got to be about the content. The second thing is obviously then the production. As I say, subconsciously, even if you're not a techie person, you will subconsciously expect a certain level of quality, because if it's of low quality, if you're sat under a runway in a bridge talking into a dictaphone, you're only listening to it for 5 minutes before the noise of the planes exactly just annoy you, regardless of how good the content is. You're just going to turn off. So that's the second thing. Good content, great production, and then I suppose the third thing beyond that is good distribution and marketing surrounding it, getting people to listen to what you do.
Fabulous. Brilliant. So hopefully I think we've given people lots of juicy information there to have a real good think about this morning. We've just got a couple of minutes left, so I've put my little prompt up there to see if anybody's got any specific questions they'd like to grill you with this morning. Judith has also mentioned Brené Brown's podcast. So I was expecting somebody to mention that one, so I'm not sure whether you've come across Brené Brown, Adam. She's very much, I don't know how you describe it, self-development, self-help. She's quite female-focused, but she's quite, she's definitely, if you're big on self-development, particularly for women, she's pretty big. French and Saunders podcast as well.
I've listened to that one, that's really good.
Funny, so yeah, that's all good. So if we've got a few people listening now who are feeling inspired and thinking, I've had this little idea at the back of my mind for ages, maybe now is time to bite the bullet, or they're thinking, this is definitely the thing I want to get started in 2021. What kind of help could they get from you, and how do they get in touch with you?
Okay, cool. Well, at the moment, we're actually offering a free consultation with regards to either starting or developing a podcast. And we're also doing a free first production of a podcast episode if you already have that. So the way to get in touch with us would be to go to our website, which is www.npmedia.co.uk. On there, you go to the podcast page, and it explains in more detail. There's a video that explains what we do, and it also shows quite clearly the three different sort of production options we do. We have sort of a gold, silver, bronze package. Starting out with a bronze is for people who are already creating content who just need it to sound better. The silver one is more editing, and we can add bespoke music stingers and jingles and all that kind of stuff. And
music.
Music as well. And then the third one is our sort of deluxe consultative package, which is basically we get on board as your executive producers, and we are involved in every element. And we might actually come to you with loads of kit and people and record it wherever you are, or do it online. We distribute it for you and all that kind of stuff. So there's a level for everybody, whether you're a beginner podcaster or whether you're established and you want to take your podcast to the next level. There's something for you. So that's the best thing to do. Go to our page, our website, and have a look around. You can get in touch with us via there. And like I said, we'd love to hear from you from that consultative perspective, just to hear about your idea, even if you've not started yet. Like, tell us what you want to do, and we'll be able to advise you best how to get going.
Yeah, no, that sounds absolutely awesome. That's a really good offer, that free consultation. I'm not sure you...
Get it whilst it's hot. It ain't going to be around for long.
You might have to put a limit on them. But yes, if you any links there, Adam, that you just talked about there, if you pop them into the comments, and then anybody that's watched them can pick those up. For anybody who watches this back later, because we tend to have more people that watch it back later rather than join us live. So if you do that, give us a little hashtag replay so that we know you're watching. But if you've got any questions that you've sort of that crop up just as we sign off, or if you watch this later, then feel free to keep posting your questions into the comments, and I'm sure that Adam will keep his eye on it, and will happily answer any more questions that you've got.
Absolutely, more than happy to.
Yeah, cool. No, I think that's been really, really useful, Adam. I'm sure we've lots of useful thought for me anyway, and hopefully food for thought for other people watching as well. So now we've got lots of people inspired to get out and create new amazing podcasts. So thank you very much for your time today, Adam. Thank you to everybody else for tuning in and listening and watching. Have a great Friday, everybody, and we'll see you all.
Thanks for having me.
soon.
Thanks, Paula.